For those of you who don't know me, my name is Verena Hölzl. I'm an independent journalist here in Bangkok, and I'll be moderating the lunchtime discussion today. And while you're taking your seats, the FCCT has asked me to let you know that there is an event coming up this evening at 5:30 for those of you who are interested in the human rights situation in Myanmar. It's hosted by the UN Office for Human Rights and Canada's International Development Research Center, 5:30 tonight. You're very welcome to join. And the other event I was asked to bring to your attention is a book talk with Ian Williams on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Ian wrote about the rise and fall of the Chinese economy. The book is called Vampire State. Sounds promising. And with that, let's shift our gaze to a place that is not that often discussed at the club, Bangladesh. I've reported from there quite a bit, and I'm happy to be moderating this discussion this morning. There's been plenty of momentum in the country over the past year, and we've been hoping that we could merge some perspectives from both Bangladesh and Myanmar on the situation that links both countries. As you all remember, a year ago, students all across the country were taking to the streets. They were protesting against Bangladesh's prime minister, who they accused of being an authoritarian leader. The UN says that in the crackdown on these protests, up to 1,400 people were killed. They ended when Hasina eventually decided that she could not hold on to power any longer in early August. She boarded a helicopter and took off to India, where I think, from what we know, she still is to this day. The students who were behind the protests then asked Bangladeshi Nobel laureate Muhammad Yunus to form a government. That government was sworn in round about a year ago, so this is a good moment for us to take stock, and also, of course, from our vantage point here in Southeast Asia, look at what's been happening in the country and what that has meant for the relations to Myanmar and the situation of the Rohingya community. Of course, there still is over 1 million refugees stuck in camps alongside the border. On the other side of this border, and we've talked about this here at the club, it is now the Arakan Army that is controlling large parts of Rakhine state. And that has not meant a betterment for the situation of the Rohingya. Quite the contrary. The UN says that up to 200,000 Rohingya, and that is a staggering number, have fled Myanmar and have also, of course, ended up in Bangladesh again over the past year. All of this is happening against the backdrop of very significant aid cuts, of course, and I think this gives us a lot to talk about this morning, and with that, I'll hand it over to the panel. Let me introduce you to Tom Kean. He's a senior consultant with the International Crisis Group, and he is closely following events in both Myanmar and Bangladesh. To his left, we have Tanbirul Miraj Ripon, who is a freelance journalist from Cox's Bazar. He's still based there. He has closely followed what's been happening in Bangladeshi politics over the past year and is also regularly reporting from inside the refugee camps. And online with us, Rohingya activist Wai Wai Nu. Wai Wai has founded the Women's Peace Network, and she was born in Rakhine State. She is joining us from the US, where it's very late, as I had already told you. So thanks so much, Wai Wai, for being here with us this morning, or tonight in your case. With that, I'd like to start with you, Tom. Can you bring us up to speed on what's been happening in terms of reforms in Bangladesh? When the interim government was sworn in, they promised a very bold agenda. Can you tell us a little bit about which issues have been tackled, how successfully have they been tackled, and of course, what do we know about the elections that are scheduled for February?
Yeah, thanks, Verena, and thanks for the opportunity to sit on this panel. So when Professor Yunus came to office last August, there was a high public expectation that reforms, political reforms, would take place and would be a priority for the interim government. You know, people were calling it a liberation, or a second liberation, or a revolution. So that gives you a sense of the sort of scale of change that many people were hoping for. And really, the purpose was to create stronger safeguards to prevent the return of another dictator or authoritarian regime after Sheikh Hasina. So Yunus formed 6 commissions about a month after taking office, and the most important of these were focused on constitutional reform, election system reform, and judicial reform. And then the commissions reported back in January with literally hundreds of recommendations. Professor Yunus created a consensus-building commission to take the process forward from there. And that's been headed, well, Professor Yunus heads it, but his deputy, who's kind of running it on a day-to-day basis, is Ali Riaz, who's a respected professor who has been based in the US. And he created a shortlist, he and his team created a shortlist of recommendations for reform from the 6 commissions, and then began talks with the various political parties in Bangladesh. I think in the first round they had close to 40 meetings, engaging with around 30 to 35 political parties. There were still many disagreements after the first round of talks, so at the start of June they launched a second round of dialogue, and the aim is to come to a consensus between the political parties, which they hope to call the July Charter. And basically, those reforms would be implemented regardless of who wins the election. So it's to create a guarantee of reform that's not dependent on the outcome of the election. They've already reached consensus on some key issues, like a bicameral legislature, judicial decentralization, whether MPs can cross the floor, because one of the reforms that Hasina introduced was a constitutional ban on MPs voting against their party or the party they were elected to. But some of the major issues that they haven't resolved are the voting system, so whether to have some element of proportional representation, and maybe Ripon can share his thoughts on that, but it seems to be one of really the key points of disagreement. At the moment, Bangladesh has a first-past-the-post voting system, and routinely either the BNP, the opposition party, or the Awami League has got a huge majority of seats with 40% of the vote or so, and sometimes the vote share has been very similar, but the sort of seat distribution has been very lopsided. So proportional representation, the idea is it would create more voices in parliament and make it more difficult for one party to get a supermajority. So that's kind of the status of the reform process. The election date has been a really controversial issue. And I think just to run through some of the key players here, you've got the army. It essentially made the decision to get rid of Hasina when it refused to enforce her orders to shoot protesters. So they're a key stakeholder. She couldn't hold on without the army's backing. And after she fled the country in August, as Verena mentioned, then the army reached an agreement with the protesters, student protest leaders, and major parties to create the interim government. So the army has been a key player and is still supporting the interim government. The interim government is dependent to some extent on its support. And then you've got the political parties. So as I mentioned, the BNP, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, was the opposition under Hasina. Now it's seen as the front runner in any election, the kind of government in waiting, if you like. And yet then another major party is Jamaat, which is the largest Islamist party. It's very influential. And the students now also have their party, the NCP. Then, of course, you still have Hasina, Sheikh Hasina in the background in India, not far away. Her party has been banned recently, so they won't be in the election, but still a political force. I mean, we don't know what percentage of people support the Awami League, but it's, I mean, Ripon again may be able to give more of a sense on this, but often I hear like 20–25% of the population are quite diehard Awami League supporters, so they're still there in the background. So when will the election be held? Professor Yunus initially said between December and June, so December this year, June next year. The BNP, as the front runner, wants the election as soon as possible. And the students who are setting up their party, they want the election sort of as late as possible to give themselves more time. But also they point to the need for more time to negotiate over political reforms. And just recently, in May, these disagreements came to a head when the army and BNP were both putting pressure onto the interim government and Professor Yunus, and he threatened to resign. He was kind of talked out of it. There was some crisis talks, and he announced the election would be held in April. But then he flew to London and met the head of the BNP, and they sort of seemed to come to an understanding that if BNP played ball on the reforms, then he might bring the election forward to February. I think this reflects a political reality, that is, the reform process needs the BNP on board, as the BNP will likely, or is the front runner for an election. If it doesn't agree to the reforms are probably dead in the water. And Yunus really only has a couple of points of leverage. One is public demands or expectations for reform. The BNP doesn't want to be seen as a spoiler. But the other is the election date. So he's dangling the carrot of an earlier election to try and coax a deal out of the BNP, I think. And to me, it seems like there might be, probably will be a deal of sorts, maybe more limited than what the students and Professor Yunus and many people want, but still a deal that will contain some important constitutional changes, legal changes, and then an election in early 2026. That's how it seems at this stage, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Ripon, can you tell us a little bit about how the people in Bangladesh feel about these reforms? There was so much enthusiasm, confidence that everything would be great. Where do we stand? Like, how do people feel about the reforms at the moment?
Yeah, thank you, Verena, and thank you for coming here, everyone. You know, July is we call the monsoon uprising. Some people named it revelation. Some people named it the second liberation, and the economists named it Bangladesh begins again. But from the beginning of the after ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, then the world big booster, Professor Yunus, take the power, and people, and especially youth people who led the uprising, they expect many more reformation from the professor, and especially, you know, the justice systems and political welfare state they are expecting from the government, and also justice of the during the July uprising and in the regime of the Sheikh Hasina, she have done lots of disappearance cases and forced disappearance cases, and she imprisoned many political oppositions, and even 10th grade student who is not even teenager, even close to the teenager, or she imprisoned the lots of young people, and also she when the people raised the voice against her, against her activities and many things. She imprisoned every single one if she thinks that those people or these individuals are threats for the Awami League. So people are organized to against the Awami League, and then people got success. But now, in recent data, Bangladesh economy under the Professor knows is stable now, but the issues now, Bangladesh is again in the same clock round and is going to in the similar way. For some regions like justice systems is delaying, and among the political parties there are no consensus to treat the people with the democratic way. They think peoples can be manipulated by their thoughts, and even the interim government taking the decision by the influence of Facebook post, can say the Facebook post, and they are making some decision by the mobs. Like, mobs is now a culture. And the people now thinking that they need the job, the youth people need the job, the youth people need the education opportunity and which is more relevant with the skills improving, and also the political stability. In Bangladesh, these three both are absent. Even there's a lot of, even my colleague, my friends, Tom's already told about the reformation consensus committees, but there is no education committees. Like most of the youngs are expected those things from the world big figure, Professor Yunus, about the reformation of educations. Because Bangladesh education is not relevant with the even research focused, even is not even skill focused. It's just like as a making some new slave to join the one company which is not even pays the international standard salaries, but they are just making them to put to a slave. So Bangladesh young people are still expecting those things, and political divisions is really increasing. Now the young students-led political party, which is National Citizens Party, NCP, they are blaming to the old parties they didn't have done or anything else for the peoples. So they are come here to take that responsibility to change the Bangladesh political narratives and maybe the welfare state. But in the some process locally, there's a lots of questions about the new student leaders, because they are now linked with the local, according to the local political local newspapers, they are now linked with the corruptions, the students. So which is more frustrating for the Bangladeshi people, the young people who are even take that chairs or form the political parties, they are now very much connect with the troubling the expensive cars. So and also they are very much conservative with the women's, like very much conservative. They are trying to making the consensus with the Islamists, because Islamists are in the street. And during the July uprising, the Islamist people, mostly the Qawmi, Wahhabi, and in the some portion Salafist people, they occupied the street and they participate on that protest, and they have a significant, they claim they have a significant contribution on to ousted the Sheikh Hasina. So they are now stakeholder of the July uprising. So now they say we want to make the Bangladesh is now a Islamic country, or even some political parties, like as one name is Islamic Shashan Tantra, its names. So they demanding Sharia law in the Bangladesh. So still Bangladesh is in the stage of.
How can you quantify how many people support ideas like this?
I think Bangladeshi people is still they are in the liberal stage, but they are now in mixed portions. Like they are confused about what they have to do or who they have to drop a vote to select and govern them. So still this confusion stays, but in the coming election probably it will reshape, and still Bangladeshi people, majority people, they don't want the Islamic parties in the power.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to find out in February where people stand, if they get to vote freely.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the role that the Rohingya situation is playing in the election campaign that is slowly gearing up? Do the parties have different proposals, how to move forward with the situation, or is it a topic at all?
Yeah. Rohingya context and Rohingya situation is kind of old, but is very recent context for the Bangladeshis and for the Bangladeshi people. Most of the Bangladeshi locals, especially Dhaka's people, not even rural, who are not, except Chittagong region, the Cox's Bazar peoples are aware about the Rohingya people. They are increasing, the number is increasing. Still the new arrival Rohingyas are coming. So it's a new coin of the politics. So Bangladeshi mainstream political parties, especially BNP and Jamaat, now they are in the street to do the politics with the Rohingya coins. But even during the Sheikh Hasina's regime, she have done lots of mistakes on the Rohingya context. So now BNP has the one legacy. They have one success to repatriate the Rohingya, a few number of the Rohingya repatriation.
Success, quote unquote.
Yeah, it's very old one, but the scenario has changed. Even the Myanmar political situation has changed, and Rakhine even now the de facto is evolving, and they are occupying lots of territories in the Rakhine. So even the interim government has tried to take one decision to connect the Rakhine de factos, but there's lots of questions how they connect the de factos. But even interim government, the professionals try to connect with the de factos. But the political parties, they have a campaign to, we have the experience, that especially BNP, Bangladesh Nationalist Party, which is now leading political parties in street. So they said we have the experiences to solve the Rohingya crisis, because our founder, Mr. Who is the even former military chief, the Major General Jiaur Rahman, he have that legacy. So we have the tactics to how to solve the Rohingya issues. And on the other hand, Jamaat have the Islamic sentiment, and they are the major Islamic parties. So Rohingya Muslims are they somehow in favor of the Jamaat people, somehow in the some portions. So that's why Jamaat trying to say it in some of the diplomatic missions and tables. They said like whole world community should work on the to make a free space, independent space for the Rohingya people, especially Rohingya people inside the Rakhine, which is even Arakan Army has rejected, and they feel it's threat. So there is a lots of questions still, but the political parties has no clarified guidelines, and even BNP, Jamaat has no specific guidelines and visions and missions to resolve the Rohingya crisis. And even if they fail to resolve the Rohingya crisis, and what would be the solution, they don't have the ideas about that. So still it's for the Rohingya people and who is involved with the Rohingya issues and international stakeholders, they are still chasing or pushing them to make it. Even Rohingya people is still demanding, even from the Rohingya people, Rohingya stakeholders, they are demanding the, even recommending to the Bangladeshi politicians and Bangladeshi government to make a proper guideline to resolve the Rohingya crisis.
Yeah. Maybe let's hear from the Rohingya stakeholders. Thanks, Wai Wai, for being so patient with us. You have met Professor Yunus shortly after he was sworn in. Can you tell us a little bit about your expectations were from the interim government and if those expectations have actually been met.
Thank you, Verena. Can you hear me all?
Yes, all good. We can hear you, we can see you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an honor to join you all today in Bangkok. To answer your question, based on my engagement with Dr. Yunus, so far my expectations of the interim government are higher than what I would had with the recent administration. Indeed, I was invited to meet Dr. Yunus in September at a private event following the previous engagement with him when, for instance, when I was in Columbia University as an Obama scholar, as well as during his visits to Myanmar. From all of this, I can say that Dr. Yunus understands the challenging dynamics and present urgency of the Rohingya crisis. So it's no surprise that Dr. Yunus began his national leadership last August by calling for more international support to Rohingya refugees. Since then, I believe that he has continued to leverage his reputations and network as a global leader and a Nobel Peace Prize winner to help find a lasting solution for Rohingya. For example, Dr. Yunus' administration was central in proposing the idea of a UN high-level conference on Rohingya and encouraging member states to vote for it in New York. So as you may know, the conference will take place this September, and I'm certain that the conference will encourage international and regional stakeholders to confront the dire reality of my community and by issuing, which will be a key outcome document, by issuing the outcome document and hoping that finally the document will address the short-term and long-term needs of Rohingya. And we're also hoping that it will provide an opportunity for civil society engagement. My organization, Women's Peace Network, as well as many others, planned on directly contributing to this historic event. The conference is also built on the Secretary General March visit to Bangladesh, as well as the ICC's applications for arrest warrant on Bangladesh and Myanmar case. International efforts such as these have always been critical in ending Rohingya crisis. This is simply because we have no other choices. Burmese domestic, as many of you know, domestic mechanisms have long been vulnerable and basically destroyed because of the military coup, while the political pro-democracy leaderships have since taken some steps to rebuild the country. It's challenging to determine if it has the capacity to deliver actions for lasting solutions for Rohingya, especially in the context where the ground situations in Rakhine states are rapidly changing. So until we can count on domestic processes, we believe the international community, including Bangladesh, should take necessary measures to protect the Rohingya and work for their safety, sustainable and voluntary dignified return home. So while Dr. Yunus is in power, I believe that his country can do more to push the international community into actions, especially for a lasting solution to the Rohingya crisis. The Yunus administrations can also do more domestically. Meaningful consultations with the community members, which has been lacking forever, including with women and youth, are a must. In Cox's Bazar, over 1 million refugees have been facing increasing livelihood and protection risks over the past years as a result of, as you mentioned, massive aid cut and rapid influx of Rohingya fleeing Rakhine state due to the Arakan Army's atrocities. There are also concerns about the deteriorating boat crisis. As the chief advisor on Rohingya, Dr. Khalilur Rahman, can begin regular community meeting with the refugees to know what they're facing, what they need, and what they envision in the future. The administrations we're hoping that the administration will prioritize engagement with the Rohingya first before any other stakeholders. This approach will help ensure the administration has the clearest understanding of the crisis and is not manipulated by the certain agenda from Burmese authorities and stakeholders. Engagement with all relevant stakeholders is definitely necessary, but only when there is an agreement on Rohingyas' protections, equal rights, restorations of land and property, justice, and other conditions in Burma.
Thanks,
this
Wai
is
Wai.
important for us.
I'm sure there's more room for us to talk about this. I would just like to sprinkle in, like, can we go to the micro level a little bit? For example, you were mentioning education. I remember it's always been such a struggle for people who were willing to educate their youth in the camps to actually be doing that. They were not allowed to be doing it, and which seems hard to understand why not. So I was wondering, this is a small thing that the interim government could have changed, I believe, and I was wondering, has there been a positive change? I don't know, maybe Ripon or Wai Wai, one of you, can you give us an update on that, just to have like a very concrete example, also given that the aid community is pulling out of the camps. I think this is even more important.
I think
maybe Ripon can provide more details as he is coming from Cox's Bazar, but what I can say and what I can tell is that one of the key calls from the refugees in Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar, especially young people, is the education itself. And so far, our understanding in the camps is that only there are self-help educations are only the education systems that are available for the refugee for example, for high school level educations. There are NGOs run educations program available, but those are mostly like literacy programs and so and so. There is no quality and higher education options or opportunities available for the Rohingya refugees.
Yeah.
During the past administration, there were a crackdown over the Rohingya self-organized schools, but now it seems like there is more flexibility, and there is many of them are able to continue to run these schools. So I think there hasn't been any substantial improvement, and however, there hasn't also been kind of a crackdown over those self-help program. But certainly, to your points, I do believe that these are small steps the current administrations, the interim government can take to improve the situations on the ground, especially providing hope for the young people through the education.
Yeah. Okay. So it's good to hear there's been a little bit of progress on that front. I would like to come back to Tom with our next question. You have recently authored this report, and I found it quite interesting. So when I was last in the camps, that was like early 24, the situation was still such that there was such a massive fear of Rohingya armed groups that it was barely possible to talk to people about it. And from what you're saying in your report, to a certain extent, that sentiment seems to be shifting. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes, so we recently published this report on the risk, as we saw it, of a Rohingya insurgency and what the potential consequences of that might be. So Rohingya armed groups have been active for many decades, since independence. Most of you might be familiar with ARSA, which carried out attacks in 2016-17 that prompted the Myanmar military's campaign against the Rohingya, which the US and others have called a genocide. So more recently, a group called RSO re-emerged. It's an older group, and these groups were mainly active in Bangladesh. But last year, they started cooperating with the Myanmar military against the Arakan Army, which was advancing into northern Rakhine state. The military and Rohingya armed groups were unable to stop the Arakan Army from capturing northern Rakhine, but since then, these Rohingya armed groups, which had previously been fighting each other for control of the camps, came to a kind of informal truce last November in Bangladesh, and agreed informally again to cooperate against the Arakan Army. And since then, they've held rallies and meetings in the camps regularly, telling Rohingya that they need to go back to Rakhine and fight against the Arakan Army. And for now, only ARSA is really actually carrying out attacks in northern Rakhine. Recently, they killed several Arakan Army soldiers. So most refugees that we interviewed for the report, they don't trust or support these armed groups. These groups have really made life hell for many refugees over the years. And so, they're only having a moderate amount of success in their recruitment activities in the camps. I think there's still a huge amount of skepticism. What are the motives of these groups? Can we trust them? And in the past, they've used forced recruitment as well, these armed groups, and there's a lot of sort of residual anger at that, and as I mentioned, some of the abuses. But the fact, I suppose, that they've stopped fighting amongst themselves in the camps has helped their image to some extent, and that they've been holding these rallies and meetings. They've become a much more open presence in the camps, and I think for that reason there's a bit less fear talking about the armed groups. Whereas before they were operating a bit more underground and were, really a security threat or a threat to yourself, if you're a refugee, that you could be caught up in the violence. So there was a lot of fear. But what I think, there has been maybe a slight increase in support from some people for these armed groups. What I think has really changed is that from our interviews, more and more refugees saw armed struggle as the best or only way to achieve their rights and return to Myanmar. And I think there are a couple of reasons for this. One is that they've now been in Bangladesh for almost 8 years, and there's been no progress on repatriation. If anything, repatriation seems further away than ever. The second is that the Arakan Army, as Wai Wai Nu mentioned, has carried out human rights violations against Rohingya in northern Rakhine state that it suspects of collaborating with either the Myanmar military or Rohingya armed groups. Since the start of last year, up to 200,000 Rohingya, and likely at least 150,000, we don't know the exact number, have entered Bangladesh, and many of them to escape this violence. And then I think the third factor is that they feel abandoned by the international community, particularly as a result of aid cuts. So since the start of the year, the US has withdrawn a lot of its funding for the response, the humanitarian response. Last year, it provided 55% of all aid. So that is a huge hole, and it can't be filled by other countries. It's too big, right? So we're seeing schools close down, healthcare centers close down, waste management services be cut back. There's now dengue spreading in the camps. Rohingya have told me that it's much worse than in previous years because the waste management isn't as good. And so I think all these factors combined have created a level of desperation that is, encouraging more people to consider armed struggle. And I think they're looking also at events in Myanmar where you have conflict all around the country and drawing their own conclusion that, well, you know, everyone else has an armed group to represent them, we need our armed group too. Certainly, I mean, it would be really interesting to hear from Wai Wai Nu, like, how dominant she thinks this sentiment is. As I said, my sense is the level of support for Rohingya armed groups that are there at the moment is quite low, but this idea of armed struggle is taking root a bit more deeply, not amongst everyone, but among a sizable portion of the refugee community. And these armed groups are really preying on the desperation and anger of the refugees to try and recruit. And I think, you know, if they become stronger and attack the Arakan Army, it's going to have some really serious consequences, particularly for Rohingya civilians who are still in northern Rakhine. And repatriation will only kind of become a more distant prospect. So just a few things, I guess, you know, what kind of needs to happen, in my opinion, to avert this potential insurgency and the consequences of it, which would be disastrous. The Arakan Army, I mean, absolutely has to begin a serious dialogue with the Rohingya leaders, particularly in the camps, because that is, you know, where the armed groups are trying to recruit. So I think there needs to be an effort made to reach out to camp leaders who don't support the armed groups. But that's going to be tricky in this kind of security environment where Rohingya armed groups are active and seem to be able to move around quite openly. You know, anyone that the Arakan Army talks to becomes a potential target. So it needs to be, you know, there also needs to be a security strategy, a security response from the authorities to limit the activities, restrict the activities of the armed groups. But then also, you know, it's absolutely vital to the extent possible, to maintain the funding for the aid response. As I said, the US has pulled a huge amount of funding out. That's not necessarily going to be replaced, but maintaining, to the extent possible, the size of the response, the scale of the response, is essential. So other countries, whether they're from Europe, Australia, Canada, non-traditional donors as well, also need to step up. But then some policy changes from Bangladesh to make the response more sustainable. So at the moment, Rohingya in the camps can't work legally. And so creating opportunities to generate income is going to be really important as well, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. Wai Wai, how do you perceive the prospect of armed struggle as a quote-unquote solution to the crisis?
Well, first of all, thank you, Tom, for clarifying a few things regarding the armed groups and the report, especially when I read it. I mean, it's great that you guys came up with this report, but when I read it, I felt like, you know, the role of the current groups, the Rohingya arms groups such as ARSA, have been highlighted in a way that they have an equal level field with the Rakhine arms groups, precisely Arakan Army. And we all know that, which is not true. The groups, the ARSA and other groups are significantly smaller and small in manpower and weaker in capacity. And then their role in the community is often, like you mentioned, it's questionable because we do not believe that they have popularity and support from the community, and their motivations and their tactics are always questionable. Now, to answer your question, Verena, after decades of genocide, there is a growing awareness in the community that an armed struggle is necessary for the survival in Burma. But I want to emphasize that this is based on an idea of a professional army following international norms, unlike ARSA and other smaller groups that are unpopular. So I believe that this idea of a professional army follows the example of a certain, for example, PDFs and EROs in Burma, who are defending themselves and their land from the military. I think, I guess I want to emphasize again, to understand the Rohingyas' realities, like analysts, for instance, and researchers must distinguish these differences, because when we discuss about the arms struggle for Rohingya, it's often become quite a sensitive topic, as Rohingya are majority Muslim population. In this context, again, aid cuts have been disastrous for Rohingya refugees, and the cut have slashed WFP's food rations and other livelihood opportunities for the communities that have been actually forced to rely on humanitarian aid due to the situation, the very costs of their deportations and situations and conditions in the camp itself. I think facing this setback, more Rohingya, especially youth, have become more hopeless about the future. After years in, again, squalid refugee camps, many Rohingya feel they have no choice but to seek safety elsewhere. It's also, I think, we often downplay the issue of human trafficking. So for us, it is unacceptable to see how human traffickers take advantage of these refugees by extorting or bribing them and forcing them into deadly land and sea crossing. And other protection concerns, including the rise in sexual and gender-based violence, and domestic, including the domestic and interpersonal violence against women and girls. While it is, I think there is some connection with the aid cut and recruitment, but there are also many other key issues that we must discuss.
Yeah, thank you for sharing on this obviously sensitive question. And I think what both of you have mentioned is an interesting thing to point to think about, that like people all over Myanmar have taken up arms, and to think about it from that perspective. I would like to know from Ripon, how is the Bangladeshi public perceiving this? I think you had mentioned to me that they refer to these groups as terrorists.
Yeah, I think in the whole world that some media has some issues, but Bangladeshi media have, in my perspective, Bangladeshi media have, wrongfully quoted the crisis group reporter, like they translate the rebels even militant to the terrorist organization, to the Rohingya people. So they named Rohingya rebels, Rohingyas armed groups. They translate it to the Bengali, like in Shantrashi in English, terrorist. So yeah, they somehow manipulated that context, and that's why the local people and entire Bangladesh got that report, I think this one. So this report has, in some portions, like is fearfully, Rohingya people are now taking the arms and getting trainings from to fight against the Rakhine de facto, so Rakhine rebels. And it also, inside the Rakhine, it also impacted to the harmony. In the other side, in Cox's Bazar, I'm from the Cox's Bazar, I born in Cox's Bazar, and I saw the many people, they have a fear about that. And even again, the Bangladeshi political parties, they use the Rohingya coin, and also even in the some interim government, we hear from the interim government, we hear the Bangladesh would be the next Gaza. So so it created some xenophobic thoughts in the local communities and host communities. And in the some portion after the Sheikh Hasina ousted, there is some incident also happened that Rohingya people and host communities are in front of the, they are clashing, and distrust is increasing in some portions. But some even maybe elite people have some distrust in between Rohingya people, but who are the labor people who can earn the money, like taxi drivers or local small shops, they said, we still have the trust and we have a very good understanding with the Rohingya people. So the report has said something which is really ground required things, and which is ground facts. The report already have portrayed and noted, I mean, investigated the some ground facts, and which is, in my perspective as a local, which is true. In the facts are true, the investigations are and somehow relevant. So Cox's Bazar people are more tensed about the Rohingya people. They are expecting the repatriation, and they are also, on the other hand, they are frustrated about to do not repatriating in Rohingya, and they are also occupying the local markets. So local labor markets. So, and you know, the international humanitarian agencies, they collaborate. I mean, they give a chance to the host communities to get the jobs inside the Rohingya camps. So for the fund crisis, so locals and including Rohingya peoples are losing their jobs. So for the losing jobs, and some people has some angers, so it create also another tension to the Rohingya versus host communities. So international community should balance the host community and Rohingya communities job opportunities, which is created on the Rohingya context, and after that working on the Rohingya repatriation and work on some cohesion making programs.
Yeah. With that, I guess I have asked enough questions, and I would like to hand it over to the audience. We have a microphone in the back, as always. Don't be shy. Pierre.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pierre Prakash with International Crisis Group, also work with Tom. Thank you to the three of you for a very interesting conversation. Lots to unpack in there, I think. I wanted to ask a question to Wai Wai Nu about the UN high-level conference that you referred to. And what I wanted to ask you, because there's a lot of talk about this conference, but it's not very clear what it's going to achieve or what it's meant to achieve, and who's going to be representing who in that conference. And so I wanted to ask you, you know, as a civil society voice for the Rohingya community, what are your expectations from this conference that's going to be held in September on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly? And who should be representing the Rohingya community? Because I think the risk is going to be that you're going to have all international donors there, but who represents the Rohingya? And I don't want to go into too much details, but I think there are things being set up in the camps in terms of representation for the Rohingya which are slightly compromising or, you know, problematic. And so who represents the Rohingya there, and what are the expectations? Is it going to turn out to be a pledging conference just to, you know, sustain the humanitarian effort in Cox's Bazar, or are there more things that should be addressed? And a final addition to that is, how do you discuss the issue of a sustainable solution without the Arakan Army in the room? Thank you.
Should I answer?
Yes, go for it.
Sure. Thank you very much for your questions. Very timely and relevant. I guess to break down what is the high-level conference itself, as I mentioned earlier, the conference itself was proposed by Dr. Yunus, and its government and they had a higher expectation for the conference. But then our understanding is after all of the negotiation, there will be one outcome document, which is going to be produced after the conference. So I think at this moment, the outcome document is the key product of the conference, and what entailed in the document itself is more important than what does the conference structure look like, and who is going to represent the Rohingya, or who is going to take part in the conference itself. So the key is the outcome document has been somehow circulated as a first draft, and now is time for the member states to negotiate the document itself. So I think what's more important is that for member states to engage with the Rohingya more meaningfully than who is going to be picked or choose to speak on during the conference itself or not. So some of our communities and organizations are trying to engage with the member states, and it has not been easy. The modality resolution for the conference itself requires the member states to engage with the Rohingya communities and civil society members, and to have a series of pre-dialogues and meetings. And I think those pre-dialogues and meetings are the most important than the conference itself, the September 30th event. So now, although there has been some meetings happening here and there, but these meaningful engagement or meaningful consultation has not been done yet, to our understanding. And now with to your questions about who is going to represent, we are also aware that there has been some meetings and selections and discussions about speakers. All of these are happening in Bangladesh. There are also concerns among the communities in the refugee camps that for the fact that if the speakers is or are picked by the authorities, and they will not have ability to basically speak freely. So I think we cannot, I don't think we can avoid these processes. So Bangladesh government would want to bring a speaker or two, and I think these will happen regardless of, the concerns by the members of the community. But I think what is the most, I think thinking about like ways in which the community can represent a little better is to encourage the UN and the facilitators, including the President of the General Assembly, to encourage them create the conference in a way that there is room for the Rohingya community to meaningfully engage or participate during the conference day. So I think that is what we're trying to do. So there will, because one person maybe not represent the community or may not have ability to openly or freely speak, especially if they are coming from the camp. But then I think we also need to hear from the people from the camps, refugee themselves. So I think if there's a way for the a way by the UN itself, the organizing committee, if they can structure in a way there is multiple voices represent, and there is a room for the community to engage during the negotiation processes, and if the member states are meaningfully engaging with the community and consulting with them, then we can expect an outcome document that is reflective of the community's concerns and voices and calls. Otherwise, I think it is historic event for us, but then, again, it is also important for us to get the most out of it, including the short-term immediate needs of the community, such as meeting the financial assistance, financial aid, for example, the Rohingya response plan budget for the next year, at least when in the situations when the US funding is unstable for next year, and then the long-term solution for the Rohingya, which may include, which should include the repatriations and political negotiations within the Rakhine state. Often the international groups, human rights groups, see Rohingya crisis as a human rights crisis. In fact, maybe many of you know that this is not merely a human rights crisis. Of course, this is a genocide, crimes against humanity. The context is this, but then the conflict itself is a political conflict. So the negotiations of the Rohingya future within Rakhine state is crucial, and that should include all stakeholders involved, including Arakan Army. And now the Burma as a whole, the political dynamics are changing. So I think we don't know, only one actor or one group can deliver any promises, and we don't know where powers will lie in the next couple of years or so. I think, but at least there is a kind of a guideline or a manifesto for the Rohingya from the international community with the consultations with the Rohingya community. Then I think there is a roadmap.
Thank you.
So I think that's what many of us would expect from this, because this is not, something that will this is not something, or these conference alone will not change Rohingyas future or fortune. But then I think if we can try to get the best out of this conference, I think there is some hope to still remain or highlight, to still keep the Rohingyas cause in spotlight.
Yeah. If no one from the audience has oh no, I see a question.
Steve Parker. Thank you very much for all the insights on all the political challenges, and everything's always so complicated. Could I just ask as a tangent, how is the economy in Bangladesh doing? And is the new government, are they moving forward economic reforms as well as political reforms? And from the camps, is it a pure drain on the Bangladeshi economy, or do they actually contribute some to economic wherewithal in Cox's Bazar and related areas? And then lastly, back to the issues around the Rohingya. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding there's a number of Rohingya that are fighting with the SAC against the AA domestically. Are they affiliated with the armed groups in the camps? And how does that dynamic working? Thank you.
Maybe let's split it up, Ripon first on Bangladesh, and then maybe Tom.
Can you repeat me the question, because I'm so sorry for this.
It's okay. The question was about the economy in Bangladesh. What has the interim government done? What is the current situation, and is the Rohingya situation a strain on Bangladesh's economy, according to you?
Thank you for asking this question, and thank you, sir. Under the Professor Yunu's government, in this interim, during the interim government, and now it takes maybe more than 10 months, so Bangladesh economy is improving and is at least stable now. There's a lots of money laundering cases and lots of corruption cases. But except that, still Bangladesh is trying to, the interim government is trying to stop the money laundering and corruptions. But the professor knows internally faces lots of issues, especially administrative issues, the bureaucratic issues, security issues. So still is underdeveloping, maybe it's improving. So, but economy is still is stable now.
Are the people happy with the economy?
If the people happy or not, if you ask this question, still the youth people have no job. So if the youth or young people have no job, so they are not happy actually with this economy. But for the collective and entire Bangladesh economy is stable now. But for the youth people, specifically many youth people, they are struggling to get the job. So even many people, many young people, they have graduated for 7 years, even still they are looking for a better job. Even when they get the job and they have the first month salary is 18,000 Bangladeshi taka, it means like close to the 200 USD per month. So still people are struggling, and the price is, the daily commodities price is sometimes like jumping to the sky and sometimes it's down. Or when they jump to the sky, then it's not a drop from the sky to the very quickly to the land. So it's gradually and it's jumping and downing. So the economy or the social economic situation is not good at all. And other question is Rohingya people. There is another interesting thing is the refugee economy is building. Like 1.2 million Rohingya refugees are living inside the Rohingya camp, and they are not registered to the Bangladeshi as considered as a Bangladeshi people. Even Bangladeshi people, when Bangladesh policymakers announced the budget, yearly budget for the fiscal years, then they didn't even consider about the Rohingya people. They didn't mind keep the note about the Rohingya people. So how, many of the Rohingya people's relatives, they're living outside of the Bangladesh, especially Bangkok, Malaysia, Indonesia, or European or USA, European country or USA. So they have sent some monies to the relatives who are living inside the camps with the hundis. So they have buy some products, and gradually the refugee economy is improving. So Bangladesh somehow getting unregistered money from the refugees also, which is really still no one even focused on it. So yeah, this is happening. So
Thank you.
Yeah, on the armed groups. So last year, when the Arakan Army was advancing into northern Rakhine state, where the majority of Rohingya in Rakhine live, some Rohingya armed groups, ARSA and RSO, worked together with the Myanmar military to fight against the Arakan Army. And I think this was a very unfortunate decision from the perspective of communal relations between the Rohingya and the Arakan Army, Rohingya and Rakhine, that they ended up on different sides of the conflict. Now, we shouldn't say that Rohingya civilians were necessarily taking that position. They were really often caught in the middle of the conflict, but some Rohingya who were part of the armed groups fought against the Arakan Army. And ARSA, which is still active in northern Rakhine state, as Wai Wai Nu said, very small numbers of ARSA insurgents, they're carrying out some attacks against the Arakan Army. The Myanmar military is no longer present in northern Rakhine. Just on the economy, if I can.
Sure.
I mean, Sheikh Hasina sold a story about the Bangladesh economy, the economic miracle of Bangladesh, and tried to, the story was that it was all because of her and her government, essentially. And it's true that for about 10 years, there was very strong economic growth. but around the time of COVID, it really, some of the poor economic policy making really started to catch up with her government, and also the massive increase in corruption and cronyism as well that occurred, particularly over the last 5 years of her administration, had a really negative effect on the Bangladesh economy. And I have my doubts that the uprising, revolution, liberation that we saw last year, that it would have happened if the economy was traveling, if it was in a much better situation. Economic grievances underpinned a lot of the anger at the at Sheikh Hasina's government, and it took the spark of the protests and the brutal response to the protests to ignite the situation into the uprising that we saw. But it meant that when Professor Yunus came to power with his interim government, there was an economic mess basically left by Hasina and her cronies, many from her political party, that they are trying to clean up. I wouldn't say the economy is tracking really well, but inflation is trending downward. There were a lot of concerns that garment sector orders would dry up under this government, but they've actually been quite resilient. And remittances have returned through formal channels, which has helped to boost foreign exchange, reserves. And that's an interesting one, because when in the final days of Hasina's regime, opposition activists were saying, do your patriotic duty, don't send your remittances through official channels, deny her government these US dollars that you normally send back. Send it through the informal channels, the hundi that Ripon mentioned. But now that she is out of power and Professor Yunus is in power, it's flipped. So it's like, sending money back through formal channels is a patriotic thing to do. It supports the government, it supports the economy. And so actually, the economy isn't going too bad. It's in a better state than it was. They still have huge problems with the banks. There were billions of dollars looted out of the banks. But food prices are really crucial, along with employment. And food prices have gotten back under control, particularly during Ramadan. I think there was a lot of concerns that, it seems like it's quite common for food prices to rise during Ramadan, but the government seemed to handle it quite well in ensuring there was enough of the key commodities, to keep prices down. They kind of flooded the market, I think, and that seemed to work quite well.
Yeah, it's impressive sometimes, but sometimes it goes worst.
Thank you. I think we have another question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Dev Jot. I'm the Reuters chief correspondent for Thailand and Myanmar. Two questions, one for Ripon, one for Tom. Ripon, I'm curious about how you're viewing the Jamaat, and basically how the Jamaat has been able to sort of deepen its roots in Bangladesh after Hasina's exit, given her sort of relationship with the party, and also the relationship between the Jamaat and the army. How do you see that standing at the moment? And to Tom, if I can ask you, the one thing that we haven't, that hasn't come up in terms of the insurgency in the camps is the role of the intelligence agencies, DGFI and NSI. And I'm curious how you're seeing the relationship between the armed groups and the intelligence agencies, how that's changed since Hasina's exit. Thank you.
Do you want to start, Ripon? Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Jamaat Islam is Islamic party, but it has some war crime legacy. During the liberation war of Bangladesh in 1971, Jamaat was collaborated with the Pakistan military, who has genocided or somehow genocide to the Bangladeshi people that time. So they are collaborator as a collaborator. They're known for in history, the Jamaat Islami known for the collaborator of Pakistan military. So after the Sheikh Hasina ousted, the July uprising is the biggest chance for the Jamaat narrative. They try to occupy the whole narrative, and they try to campaign the 2024 is the real liberation. We ousted the Indians' hegemony, and we are now free from the Indian hegemony. So 2024 is the real liberation, and that's why especially Jamaat people, they named it, I mean, they would love to talk about the second liberation. And they think the Pakistan collaborators get the second chance to defeat the India to using Bangladeshi political narrative in 2024. That's why they are trying to manipulate this political narrative of 2024 July uprising or second liberation or student uprising or even revolution. They try to make that historical narrative to own by themselves, but it's not true. So Bangladeshi people, they are rejecting. They even in the some portions, the local people said, you know, students have a giant and lead and contributed that participation, but most of the labor forces, the lower grade peoples, I mean, who are living under the poverty, even they can't living in the price hiking, so they are struggled and they joined the protest against the Sheikh Hasina to free from the Sheikh Hasina. So that's why it worked, and they successfully, the Bangladeshi entire nation, they successfully ousted the Sheikh Hasina. And the second question, in Jamaat, they do not actually win the election in the, they use some tactical religious terms, like they don't win the election during the Ramadan. Ramadan is specifically on the, in coming Ramadan is in February. So they said we don't win the elections before some significant reformation. And on the other hand, military, when the, in the military chief, Bangladesh Army chief, he told the media they won the elections. And as soon as possible, if the interim government held the election and hand over the power to the elected government, then they can take the decision, or they can, I mean, the elected government can be run the state proper way. So that's why the Jamaat and army's relation in the some portions strategically is not in the same way, because Jamaat is not expecting elections, because there is one significant cause is during the Sheikh Hasina, most of the Jamaat top leader was hanged as a war criminal, bodied by the court, and they hanged by the court verdictions. So the Jamaat economic earning sources, financial sources are collapsed by the Awami League, organizingly collapsed by the Awami League. So that's why Jamaat is now economically is now poor. So they're trying to grab the monies from the supporters, from the fields. So that's why they don't win the election at this time. But other parties, most of the parties, they're expecting election in the February. Even the Professor Yunus, when he traveled to the London, and then he met the BNP's exile acting chairman, Professor Yunus met the acting chairman of the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, BNP's chairperson. Then he decided, they both meet, and they both decided the election date or election weeks, basically second week of the February 2026. They will have, the interim government will hold the elections. So this is the thing. So I think, so in my perspective, Jamaat and army's relation is not in the same way.
Tom, on the intelligence agencies.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So certainly they have a high degree of influence in the camps, and that's always been the case, particularly DGFI, as it has more autonomy from the government and the army as well. It operates more autonomously. And they interact with Rohingya armed groups and Arakan Army regularly, as well as other stakeholders, political stakeholders in the camps. And DGFI was certainly involved in the November truce between the Rohingya armed groups, this informal agreement. And they will say, well, look, we ended the turf war in the camps. You know, the violence has decreased significantly. This has been a success. And I think that's true to some extent, and they can take a degree of credit for that. But it's been a double-edged sword, in my opinion, because it's created space for armed groups to become more active, to play a more dominant role in the camps, and that's restricted the opportunities for civil society, for genuine civil society to emerge from the camps. It's unclear to me exactly what the strategy is, if there is one, vis-a-vis the Rohingya armed groups. But I think what I would say is that to the Arakan Army, and I think this is an important point, it certainly looks like security agencies are supporting Rohingya armed groups against them. Now, if Bangladesh wants to have a better relationship with the Arakan Army, I think it needs to do more to make sure that the Arakan Army doesn't think it's supporting Rohingya armed groups against it. That's going to be a bit of a non-starter for better relations between Bangladesh and the Arakan Army. Under the interim government, Bangladesh has tried to engage the Arakan Army. So Khalilur Rahman, the High Representative, has met with members of their political wing. But in recent months, as Rohingya armed groups have become more active, you know, those talks haven't really developed into a broader dialogue between Bangladesh and Arakan Army. And so I think, you know, limiting the influence of Rohingya armed groups is really the strategy that Bangladesh needs to take if it wants to improve relations with the AA.
Yeah, thank you. And with that, I see one hopefully last question. We're running out of time.
I think it could be a quick one. Max Gardner from CORE. This is more about, and I think it's been touched on a little bit, but in late May, the Bangladesh ambassador was recalled from Myanmar and was cited under kind of just an administrative process. I've heard a couple of different versions of events as to why that took place. Some say he was PNG'd by Myanmar. Some people say it was actually more of an internal dispute, things like that. I was wondering if anyone here has any perspectives on why that took place, basically. Thanks.
Well, yes, there were a lot of stories going around as to what the reason was. But he obviously wasn't PNG because he was back in Naypyidaw a few weeks later. So, I mean, I don't think that story made much sense. Min Aung Hlaing and Professor Yunus met in April. Relations between Naypyidaw and Dhaka seem to be quite good. So I don't think it was, that he was PNG'd, obviously. It seems to have been to go back to Dhaka to get further instructions on policy ahead of those meetings, perhaps, in Naypyidaw. But there have also been a lot of changes in Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This happened just after the Foreign Secretary was replaced. Quite a few ambassadors were also replaced. So it could also be linked to those internal changes. But I don't think it was anything as traumatic as it was kind of made out to be. But
in my perspective, you know...
maybe Ripon will contradict me.
As my sound sense, like Bangladesh, the professor knows, you know, the old bureaucratic systems and conservative thoughts, like, you know, already I told about the Bangladesh education system. Many of the Bangladeshi, I'm so sorry for telling this, many of the Bangladeshis are memorizing the book pages. So sometimes they think it's not matching with my books. So no, keep it. They don't want to do, or they don't want to explore the new things. So sometimes it's crucial for the diplomacy. That's why Bangladeshi interim government, they are trying to reform the new things, introduce the new things to the, in my perspective, it's not even government perspective. So that's why they are trying to shuffling the list and which one is the best and fit for the diplomacy. That's why maybe they are trying to this. But there's no it's a common echo, like it's a term, like there is no dramatic changes or dramatic things, but Bangladesh is trying to resolve the Rohingya crisis. Even it's quite difficult to sharing same maritime border, like with the Myanmar, with the Yangon, and also with the Rakhine, and Bangladesh has the similar maritime, the Bay of Bengal. So Rakhine has changed, Rakhine scenario has changed, and it's now occupying by the Arakan Army, and Saitwe and Chopi is owned by the funded by the Chinese economy, China, and Saitwe is funded by the India. So it's a bit difficult to maintain the relationship with the Yangon and Bangladesh, because in the middle, Saitwe is the middle. Rakhine is the middle of these things. So in the some cases what's happened, like Arakan Army has hostages some Bangladeshi fishermen, and Bangladesh trying to negotiate. Even Bangladesh has stopped the Mongdos. The Mongdo is a land port of the Saitwe. Mongdo is a land port of the Rakhine, which is connecting the Bangladesh Teknaf river port. So it's sometimes a bit difficult to jumping to the Yangon to Cox's Bazar. So because they have to maintain the Mongdo also, because new actors is now in Mongdo. So Bangladesh is facing difficulties. That's why maybe Bangladesh trying to shuffling the diplomats to who is the better and who can negotiate the better. That's why maybe.
Thank you. And maybe, because we're running out of time, if I may ask Tom to let us know what we should be watching out for in the coming weeks and months in terms of Bangladesh-Myanmar relations.
Okay, good. I think ahead of the conference that Wai Wai Nu talked about and gave a really good summary of, and there was a bit of discussion in there about this selection process in the camps, who will represent the community. I take her point that the outcome document is really important, but I think that is an interesting thing to watch because, as she indicated, it reflects the perspective of the Bangladesh authorities, I think, on who should represent the community. So that's something I'll be keeping an eye on for sure.
Okay. Ripon? What would you be watching out for in the coming weeks and months?
Bangladesh politics.
As a Bangladeshi, I don't have that much expectation because I'm closely working with the political parties and government to interviewing, to producing some reports. So I want a state which is completely serve the nation, serve the people, a welfare state for coming days. I know it's a bit tough for the Bangladeshi peoples, for the Bangladeshi politicians, but maybe one day, someday, Bangladesh will be a people's welfare state, someday. And it would be a democratic and transparent state.
Yeah, that is a nice closing remark. Thank you very much. I can't do that any better, so with that I would just close the panel, and I'm sure we can informally keep chatting even outside of the panel. Thank you. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Verena, for the nice
Very welcome.
moderation.